Hello, in this video I'll be showing you how to make gluten-free espresso cream cheese brownies from scratch. To start off the recipe, use 3/4 cup of gluten-free flour. To measure out the gluten-free flour, I poured a bunch into a bowl and then I'm going to spoon the flour into my measuring cup. Doing this helps provide a more consistent measurement, especially as you make the recipe over and over, because the gluten-free flours tend to be heavier and pack more than the traditional flours with gluten in them. Once I have all the flour scooped out that I need for the recipe, I can return the rest to the original bag. Add the 3/4 cup flour to a bowl with a half teaspoon of salt. The flour I'm using is an all-purpose mix that includes xanthan gum, but if you don't have a mix with xanthan gum in it, add 1/4 of a teaspoon of xanthan gum. Then whisk the dry ingredients together. Next, melt a 1/2 cup or 1 stick of butter. Melting the butter will give the brownies a more fudgy texture than just using softened butter. But if you like a more cakey type of brownie, then you could use softened butter instead of melting it. I cut the butter into smaller pieces so that it will melt faster. In a separate bowl, add 1/4 cup of packed light brown sugar, 3/4 cup of granulated sugar, 3/4 teaspoon of vanilla, and the 1/2 cup of melted butter. Some brownie recipes may call to use all granulated sugar and no light brown sugar. The reason I use 1/4 cup of brown sugar is because gluten-free flours tend to absorb more moisture, and I want to make sure I have a nice fudgy brownie. And brown sugar has more moisture in it than granulated sugar does, so I think that this pairs well with the gluten-free flour to still make sure we have a moist brownie. Next, add 2/3 cup of cocoa powder into the bowl. I put this through a sifter because cocoa powder tends to be clumpy, and this will ensure that the batter is smooth and not have any lumps in it. The ratio of cocoa powder to flour is really important in this recipe if you want a fudgy brownie versus a cakey brownie. So if you want more chocolatey or bitter flavor from the cocoa powder, then you could increase the amount of cocoa powder you add even up to 3/4 cup, but I would recommend decreasing the amount of flour in that case, so that you maintain your fudgy texture rather than having a cakey brownie. Once all the cocoa powder is sifted in, whisk to combine all the ingredients in the bowl. One reason we haven't added eggs to the mix yet is because whipping the eggs could put air into the eggs, which would make a more fluffy brownie. Since I want a fudgier brownie, I'm adding the eggs after I finish whisking this together. Now that all those ingredients are combined, add 2 eggs and 2 tablespoons of coffee. As I mentioned earlier, gluten-free flour tends to absorb more moisture, so I'm adding 2 tablespoons of liquid to this to make sure the brownies stay moist and don't dry out. I'm using coffee instead of water because the coffee brings out the rich flavor of the chocolate. I use coffee in my regular brownie mix even when I'm not making the espresso cream cheese brownies. Whisk to combine these new ingredients without adding too much additional air into the eggs. And then it's time to add in the flour mixture from earlier. Whisk together the flour mixture with the batter until there's no lumps. Just to point out here, we didn't add any baking powder into the flour mixture because we don't want these brownies to rise since we want that fudgy texture. But if you are looking for a cakey brownie, you could add in 1/4 teaspoon to a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. Make sure to scrape the edges of the bowls to incorporate all the flour and whisk until there's no lumps. You don't have to worry about overmixing this since there's no gluten in the batter to overdevelop. Once the flour is well incorporated, fold in a 1/2 cup of chocolate chips. I use semi-sweet chocolate chips for this. Once the chocolate chips are well incorporated, we'll set this to the side while we make the espresso cream cheese topping. Add 8 ounces of softened cream cheese, 1/2 cup of sugar, and 1 teaspoon of espresso powder or instant coffee powder to a bowl. Then mix this on medium speed until all the ingredients are combined and the cream cheese isn't lumpy. I'm using my KitchenAid mixer here, but you could use a hand blender or even a whisk and do it manually with the same result. I'm using this spatula to wipe down the paddle attachment and the edges of the bowl to make sure any cream cheese or other ingredients are all going to be well incorporated and nothing is missed. Then I'll resume mixing for a few more seconds before adding the rest of the ingredients. Once everything is mixed together, add in 1 egg and half a teaspoon of vanilla. Then resume mixing on medium speed until everything is combined. Again, if you're using a KitchenAid mixer or a hand blender, make sure to pause the mixing and clean off your paddle attachments and bowls to ensure that everything gets well incorporated. Finally, add in 1/4 cup of mini semi-sweet chocolate chips. I prefer the mini chocolate chips to the larger chocolate chips in this part of the batter because I think they complement the coffee flavor and offer good texture without overpowering with chocolate. Once these are combined, we're ready to layer in the brownie mix and the espresso cream cheese mix and bake. Lightly grease your baking dish. I'm using this glass square 8x8 dish, but you could also use different sizes or even metal dishes. Then scoop in your brownie mix. Spread the mix out until it's mostly flat, and then scoop in the espresso cream cheese mix on top of the brownies. Just as with the brownie mix, level the espresso cream cheese mix on the top, making sure to spread all the way through all the edges and corners. Then we'll take a knife and swirl together the brownie mix and the espresso cream cheese mix on top. With a knife, I'm trying to hold it at a 45-degree angle and scoop down into the brownie mix and pull some brownie mix up on top of the espresso cream cheese mix. I repeat this going across the pan both vertically and horizontally to make sure that all of the mix has some swirls. Once I think there's enough swirls on the top, I sprinkle a few more of the mini semi-sweet chocolate chips over the top, and then I bake this at 350 degrees for 35 minutes. You might have to adjust the baking time if you're using a larger baking dish, as the batter would be thinner and cook faster. After the brownies have finished cooking, the top should be springy to the touch but not squishy. If it's still squishy, I would advise cooking for a few minutes longer. Let the brownies cool slightly before cutting. If you're like me, I can never stand to wait until the brownies are completely cool, especially because I like to eat a warm brownie. So I found that if I cut the brownies with a plastic knife, they don't tear apart or stick like if I cut the brownies warm with a metal knife. Then you're able to eat the brownies warm without destroying your brownie in the process. Now that the brownies are cut, you can use a small spatula to scoop out one of the brownies. Here you can see how fudgy and just decadent the brownies look. The key to having a gluten-free brownie that's fudgy, moist, and not dry is in the fat to flour ratio. So the fat from this recipe came from the butter, and the flour and cocoa powder mix wasn't so high in ratio compared to the butter that we had a cakey brownie. As mentioned earlier, if you are looking for a more cakey brownie, you can increase your cocoa powder and flour. But I think that the fudgy texture in this brownie is just perfect, and the espresso cream cheese topping creates a wonderful flavor profile. These brownies certainly did not last long in our house. Thanks for watching this video on how to make gluten-free espresso cream cheese brownies. Let me know how it worked out for you in the comments below, and as always, like and subscribe to see more content.